The human was already on his knees when the council chamber doors shattered inward, and the sound echoed like a gunshot across the heart of the galaxy. Chains bit into his wrists as he lifted his head, blood running freely from a cut above his eye, and still he did not beg. That alone unsettled them. The galaxy had broken warlords, emperors, hive minds, and living gods in this very room, yet the last human only looked up and asked a question no one was prepared to answer. "Before you kill me," he said hoarsely, "do you want to know why your war never ended?" The chamber fell into a silence so deep it felt physical. This was not supposed to be how humanity ended. For 3 centuries, the Galactic Concord had fought the species they now called humans. Not because humans were the strongest, or the most advanced, or even the most numerous. They were none of those things. They were simply the only species that refused to surrender, even after their worlds burned and their fleets were turned to debris. And now there was only one left. They called him Elias Rourke, though most records simply listed him as Subject Human Prime. He had been a soldier once, then a diplomat, then something far more dangerous to the galaxy than either. He had outlived Earth, outlived Mars, outlived the last human colony drifting cold beyond the Perseus Veil. The Concord believed his death would finally bring peace. They were wrong. High Arbiter Zaleth rose from his elevated dais, his crystalline form refracting the chamber lights into harsh, fractured colors. He was older than human civilization itself, a being who had overseen the surrender of 1,000 species. His voice carried the weight of inevitability. "You stand before the unified will of the galaxy," Zaleth said. "Your people are extinct. Your resistance has failed. Speak your final words." Elias exhaled slowly, as if steadying himself against something heavier than chains. His gaze moved across the chamber, meeting the eyes of beings who had ordered orbital sterilizations, population purges, and the calculated erasure of an entire species. "My final words?" he repeated. "No. These are yours. You just don't know it yet." Murmurs rippled through the council. Threats were common. Defiance was expected. What unsettled them was his certainty. 300 years earlier, humanity had been nothing to fear. A young species that had barely learned faster than light travel, clumsy and loud and endlessly curious. They had arrived on the galactic stage with open hands and hopeful eyes, offering trade, culture, and cooperation. They were met with containment. The Concord had watched humanity expand too quickly, adapt too fast, and ask too many dangerous questions. Humans didn't just learn alien technology, they improved it. They didn't just accept galactic norms, they challenged them. They didn't just survive hostile environments, they thrived in them. So the Concord made a decision. A careful, logical, perfectly justified decision. Humanity would be removed before it became a problem. The war was never declared. It began with sanctions, escalated to blockades, and ended with fire falling from the sky. Earth's oceans boiled. Mars cracked open like an egg. Human colonies burned one by one, each sending the same final transmission into the void. "We're still here." They shouldn't have been. Elias Rourke had watched his world die from orbit, powerless to stop it. He had watched his family vanish in a plume of white light. Something in him had broken that day, but something else had hardened. While the Concord celebrated another successful eradication, Elias learned what the galaxy truly feared. Not human weapons. Human mercy. He escaped capture for decades, moving through the ruins of humanity's former territory like a ghost. Wherever Concord forces expected hatred, they found something far more destabilizing. Humans who surrendered rather than fought. Humans who treated prisoners with kindness. Humans who rebuilt devastated alien worlds the Concord had abandoned as collateral damage. Every act of mercy was a question the galaxy had no answer for. Why help those who destroyed you? Why save enemies who showed you none? Why forgive what could never be undone? Those questions spread faster than any human fleet ever had. Concord soldiers began hesitating. Occupied species began whispering. Whole systems quietly stopped sending tribute fleets. The war that should have ended with humanity's extinction instead became an infection in the Concord's perfect order. And Elias became its symbol. Now, kneeling in chains, he felt the weight of that history pressing down on him. He could sense the fear behind the council's composure. They were not afraid of him as a man. They were afraid of what he represented. "You claim our war continues because of us," Arbiter Zalith said. "Explain." Elias smiled, and it was a tired, broken thing. "You built a galaxy on obedience," he said. "On fear. On the idea that peace comes from removing anything that disrupts your control." Zalith's facets darkened. "Peace comes from order." "No," Elias replied softly. "Peace comes from choice." The word struck harder than any accusation. "You never gave humanity a choice," Elias continued. "You decided what we would become. When we didn't fit, you tried to erase us. But here's the part you missed." He lifted his chained hands slightly. "Humans don't measure victory by survival alone. We measure it by what we leave behind." A counselor from the Avri Hive leaned forward, mandibles clicking. "You left nothing. Your species is gone." Elias met the creature's compound gaze without flinching. "Is it?" The chamber lights flickered as data streams activated across the council's displays, triggered by systems Elias had compromised long before his capture. Star maps bloomed into view, highlighting dozens of worlds across Concord space. Worlds the Concord had written off as unstable. Worlds now thriving. Human-built infrastructure glowed across them like veins of light. Hospitals, power grids, agricultural systems, trade hubs. Species the Concord had conquered now stood independent, unified not by fear, but by cooperation learned from a species that refused to rule them. "We taught them how to survive without you," Elias said. "How to help each other. How to choose mercy over efficiency." Zalith recoiled, a sound like fracturing glass echoing through the chamber. "This is manipulation. This is inheritance," Elias replied. The council erupted into chaos. Orders were shouted. Security forces surged forward. Elias felt the first pulse of an energy weapon strike his back, searing pain through his nerves. He gasped but did not scream. "You think killing me fixes this?" he asked through clenched teeth. "That's the most human mistake you keep making." Zalith's voice cut through the noise. "Enough. Execute him." Elias closed his eyes. Not in fear, but in exhaustion. He had done what he came to do. The seed had already taken root. As the execution field powered up around him, he whispered words meant not for the council, but for the galaxy listening through stolen channels. "Mercy doesn't die when you kill us," he said. "It spreads." The light consumed him. Across the galaxy, something shifted. On occupied worlds, soldiers laid down their weapons. On council planets, citizens demanded answers. Species' long silence remembered what it felt like to choose. The Concord had executed the last human, and in doing so, they had ensured humanity would never truly disappear. The execution was broadcast across Concord space as a warning, but it became something else entirely. For the first time in its long history, the Galactic Concord discovered that fear could not be contained once hope had been witnessed. The image of Elias Rourke dissolving into light did not terrify the galaxy. It haunted it. Species, who had never known the weight of change, suddenly felt them. Species who had obeyed without question began asking why. And questions, the Concord learned too late, were contagious. On the world of Threllis Prime, a mining colony conquered 2 centuries earlier, the first refusal happened quietly. A shipment of raw tritium was delayed. No explosions. No rebellion banners. Just a missed deadline and a single message sent to Concord overseers. "We choose to keep our children fed instead." The message should have been impossible. Threllis Prime had no independent communications network. Its systems were monitored, filtered, and controlled. But human-built infrastructure had a habit of leaving doors unlocked in ways Concord technology never detected. Within days, similar delays rippled outward. Agricultural worlds began rerouting surplus food to nearby systems without authorization. Medical stations stopped prioritizing Concord officials. Shipyards slowed production. No one declared rebellion. They simply stopped cooperating. High Arbiter Zaleth watched the reports stack up like fractures spreading through crystal. Each incident alone was manageable. Together, they formed a pattern he could not ignore. "They are imitating him," Zaleth said to the assembled council. "The human's defiance is being replicated. They are interpreting his death as martyrdom." Another arbiter added, "We must reassert control." Control had always been the Concord's answer. Fleets were dispatched. Sanctions tightened. Entire systems were threatened with sterilization if compliance was not restored. It worked for a while. Then something unprecedented happened. Concord fleets arrived at Threllis Prime expecting surrender, and instead found empty skies. No defense platforms. No attack formations. Just silence. When ground forces landed, they found the cities intact, power running, food stockpiled, hospitals operating. The population had not fled. They simply refused to engage. They lined the streets unarmed, watching the soldiers with eyes that held neither fear nor hatred. A Concord captain demanded submission. An elderly Threllis woman stepped forward and asked a question that echoed Elias's final words. "Why are you still fighting a war that already ended?" The captain hesitated. That hesitation lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Orders faltered. Weapons were lowered. No one fired. The Concord called it an anomaly. It wasn't. Across the galaxy, similar scenes unfolded. The tactics Elias had seeded for decades blossomed without him. Mercy as resistance. Compassion as defiance. The refusal to hate as the most destabilizing weapon imaginable. The Concord's military doctrine had never accounted for this. Their strategies assumed enemies who sought victory, territory, or revenge. They had no framework for opponents who sought reconciliation. And worse, Concord citizens were watching. Zaleth received reports of unrest within core systems. Debates in academic forums. Philosophers questioning the morality of eradication policies long considered necessary. Younger generations asking why an entire species had to die to preserve order. "You allowed this," One arbiter accused Zaleth during a closed council session. "I contained a threat," Zaleth replied coldly. "The human is dead." "Then why does it feel like he is still speaking?" another demanded. Because he was. Elias's final transmission had not been a message. It had been a catalyst. Humans had always understood something the Concord did not. Stories outlived bodies. Ideas outlived empires. Mercy, once witnessed, could not be unseen. Deep within Concord archives, suppressed footage resurfaced. Human medics treating alien civilians during early skirmishes. Human engineers restoring power to enemy worlds rather than sabotaging them. Human diplomats begging for negotiation even as their own planets burned. The Concord had hidden these records to justify the war. Now they spread like wildfire. And with them came a revelation that shook the Council to its core. Humanity had not merely resisted annihilation. It had prepared for it. In a classified briefing, Concord intelligence analysts presented recovered data fragments recovered from abandoned human facilities. Elias Rourke's name appeared again and again. Not as a general. Not as a leader. But as an architect. "He designed this," an analyst said, mandibles trembling. "A post-extinction strategy." The room fell silent. "You are suggesting," Zaleth said slowly, "that the human anticipated their own eradication." "Yes," the analyst replied, "and planned for what would come after." Humanity had known it could not defeat the Concord militarily. Their fleets were too small, their technology too young. So they had shifted the battlefield. They invested in people instead of weapons, in relationships instead of territory, in systems that could function without them. They taught others how to rebuild, how to self-govern, how to cooperate across species lines without centralized control. They embedded redundancy, adaptability, and choice into everything they touched. It was not a rebellion. It was an inheritance. Zaleth felt something unfamiliar coil within his core. Fear, yes. But beneath it, something worse. Regret. The Concord had prided itself on foresight, on thinking in millennia rather than decades. And yet a species barely out of its infancy had outplanned them. "Find the others," Zaleth ordered. "There must be more humans." "There are none," the analyst said. "Elias Rourke was the last confirmed human." Zaleth's facets dimmed. "Then find what he left behind." They did. Hidden across the galaxy were human-built nodes the Concord had mistaken for abandoned infrastructure. When activated, they revealed networks of communication independent of Concord oversight. Trade alliances, mutual defense pacts, cultural exchanges. A parallel civilization, invisible until now. And at its heart was a single phrase translated into 100 languages. "We choose each other." The Concord responded, as it always had, with force. Fleets were mobilized. Systems placed under martial law. Worlds that resisted were bombarded. But something had changed. Concord soldiers hesitated. Crews questioned orders. Some ships simply never arrived at their destinations. They vanished into hyperspace and did not return. Defections. Zaleth watched the reports with mounting dread. He had spent his existence believing peace was something imposed. Elias Rourke had proven it was something taught. On the former human colony world of New Dawn, now populated by 6 different species, a memorial was erected. Not to a conqueror, but to an idea. At its center stood a simple inscription carved into stone. "Mercy is not weakness. It is choice." The Concord declared the memorial illegal. It remained standing. Saleth began to dream. That alone terrified him. His species did not dream. Dreams were the province of chaotic minds, of beings driven by emotion rather than logic. Yet he saw Elias Rourke in those visions, kneeling in chains, eyes steady, unafraid. "You still think this is about me?" the human said in the dream. Saleth woke with a shudder. For the first time in 50,000 years, the Galactic Concord faced a crisis it could not solve with extermination. Killing humans had not ended the war. It had transformed it. And somewhere, deep in the network Elias had built, a final contingency waited. Not a weapon. A choice. One that would force the galaxy to decide what kind of future it wanted. The choice revealed itself on a cycle the Concord would later mark as the beginning of the end. It started with a signal. Not a broadcast, not a declaration of rebellion, not even a message meant to be understood at first glance. It was a simple activation pulse, quiet and precise, transmitted simultaneously from hundreds of human-built nodes scattered across Concord space. Every system that had ever accepted human aid felt it. Power grids shifted. Communication channels opened that had been dormant for decades. Defense arrays that were never meant to fire suddenly aligned themselves, not outward, but inward toward nothing at all. And then the message came. Not from a human. From the galaxy itself. On every world, on every screen, in every language, a single question appeared. Do you choose obedience, or do you choose each other? The Concord froze. High Arbiter Zaleth stared at the words as if they were a physical blow. This was not a call to arms. There was no threat attached. No demand. No ultimatum. The systems presenting the question were not weapons. They were mirrors. "What is this?" demanded Arbiter Vesh, her voice sharp with fear. Zaleth already knew. "This is governance without rulers," he said quietly. The Human Legacy Network was not asking for permission. It was offering autonomy. Every participating world was being given access to shared resources, open trade routes, and mutual defense coordination on one condition. They had to opt in. No coercion. No punishment for refusal. No retaliation for dissent. The Concord had never seen power wielded this way. In their civilization, authority flowed downward, enforced by fleets and fear. Humanity had inverted the model. They had created a system that only functioned if people wanted it to. "It will fail," Arbiter Vesh insisted. "Without enforcement, cooperation collapses." Zaleth said nothing. He was watching the incoming data. One by one, worlds answered. Threllis Prime chose each other. New Dawn chose each other. A former Concord shipyard world, its population exhausted by centuries of tribute, chose each other. Even some core systems hesitated, then quietly opted in, their responses hidden behind layers of bureaucratic delay. The network adapted instantly. Supply chains rerouted. Medical aid flowed where it was needed most. Defense coordination activated only to protect, never to invade. No single world was in charge. No species held dominance. Decisions were made locally, informed by shared knowledge rather than imposed law. It was messy, imperfect, slow in places and chaotic in others. It worked anyway. Concord analysts watched in disbelief as economic output stabilized across participating systems. Crime dropped. Interspecies conflict declined. Worlds that had been on the brink of collapse began to recover. How? Arbitervesh whispered. How is this functioning? Zalatha's voice was heavy. Because it accounts for failure. Human systems were built with the assumption that mistakes would happen, that people would act selfishly sometimes, that cooperation would falter. Instead of punishing those failures, the system absorbed them, adapted, and moved on. The Concord structures, by contrast, were brittle. Designed for perfection, they shattered under deviation. Fleets dispatched to suppress the network found themselves isolated. Local populations refused to provide fuel or supplies. Soldiers deserted, not to fight, but to help rebuild worlds they had once occupied. And then came the reports Zalath had feared most. Entire Concord crews were voting, not as citizens, but as individuals. The concept was radical. Concord doctrine did not recognize individual agency within collective service. A soldier obeyed. A pilot executed orders. Choice was inefficiency. Yet human influence had a way of seeping into places it didn't belong. Crews debated missions. Officers listened. Some ships turned back. Others powered down weapons mid-engagement. A fleet sent to pacify New Dawn never fired a shot. Instead, its commander opened negotiations with a planetary council and requested asylum. The Concord labeled him a traitor. His crew called him brave. Zalath convened an emergency council session. The chamber was full, yet felt emptier than ever. Several seats remained unlit, their occupants having resigned, defected, or simply vanished. We are losing cohesion, Arbitervesh said. This must be stopped. Zalath looked at the faces around him. For the first time, he did not see certainty. He saw doubt. Stopped how? He asked. Destroy the network, another arbiter said. Erase every human-built system. And the worlds that depend on them? Zalath asked. Acceptable losses, came the reply. The words echoed, hollow and familiar. Zalath realized with a quiet horror that he had said them himself, countless times before. He thought of Elias Rourke kneeling in chains. Of the question he had asked. Do you want to know why your war never ended? Zalath rose slowly from his dais. The chamber fell silent. We have tried eradication, he said. We have tried domination. We have tried fear. Each time, the problem returns, larger than before. You propose surrender? Arbitervesh snapped. No, Zalath replied. I propose listening. The reaction was immediate. Outrage. Shock. Accusations of treason whispered openly now. But beneath it all was something else. Relief. Zalath activated the central display and brought up the Human Legacy Network interface. With a single motion, he granted the Concord Council access. What are you doing? Vesh demanded. Choosing, Zalath said. The system responded instantly. Not with applause. Not with triumph. With information. Data flowed in, unfiltered. Reports of suffering the Concord had ignored. Projections showing alternative outcomes had different choices been made. There was no condemnation. No judgment. Just clarity. For the first time in millennia, the Concord saw the full cost of its peace. Silence filled the chamber. One arbiter dimmed her light and spoke softly. We thought we were protecting the galaxy. You were protecting control, Zalath said. There is a difference. Beyond the council chamber, the galaxy waited. Worlds held their breath. The network did not force an outcome. It allowed time. debate, reflection. That, perhaps, was its most dangerous feature. News spread that the Concord was considering integration. Panic flared among hardliners. Fleets loyal to the old order threatened secession. Some systems closed borders, fearing retaliation from either side. The galaxy stood on a knife's edge. Zaleth retreated to his private sanctum, a place of quiet reflection reserved for decisions of existential weight. He had never doubted himself here before. Now doubt filled the space like a living thing. He accessed a final human archive recovered years earlier, one he had never opened. Elias Rourke's personal log. The recording activated, showing the human seated in a dimly lit room, eyes tired but alive with purpose. "If you're watching this," Elias said, "then I'm probably gone. That's okay. This was never about me." Zaleth listened, unmoving. "I know that Concord thinks peace means removing threats," Elias continued. "I get it. Fear makes that logic feel safe. But peace built on fear always needs more fear to hold it together." He leaned forward slightly. "So here's my last request. Not a demand. A request. When the choice comes, and it will, don't ask what keeps you in power. Ask what lets the galaxy breathe." The recording ended. Zaleth closed his eyes. He had never considered the galaxy as something alive. Something that could suffocate. Outside, Concord loyalist fleets began mobilizing for what could only be described as a civil war. The network did not respond with weapons. It responded with evacuation corridors, medical staging areas, and ceasefire channels. Mercy, again, as strategy. Zaleth returned to the council chamber and stood before what remained of the Concord's leadership. "The human was wrong about one thing," he said. They looked at him, tense and silent. "He was not the last of his kind," Zaleth continued. "He was the first of something else." He activated the final vote. Not a decree. Not an order. A choice. The vote did not end the war. It ended the illusion that it could be won. When High Arbiter Zaleth cast his decision into the network, the Concord did not fracture in a single, dramatic moment. It unraveled slowly, painfully, like an old scar finally splitting open. Some fleets stood down immediately, their crews relieved to be given permission to stop fighting a war none of them remembered choosing. Others rejected the decision outright, declaring Zaleth compromised, corrupted by human ideology. The galaxy held its breath as Concord loyalist forces broke away, launching coordinated strikes against network nodes they believed to be the heart of the rebellion. They expected chaos. They expected collapse. They found something else. Every node that went dark triggered 3 more to activate elsewhere. Supply routes rerouted in seconds. Evacuation ships arrived before bombardments could begin. Civilian populations were moved, sheltered, protected. The network did not resist destruction by force. It adapted to it. The Loyalists were fighting a system that did not need to win. It only needed to endure. On the bridge of the dreadnought Ascendant Will, Fleet Marshal Corrin stared at tactical projections that made no sense. "They should be panicking," he snarled. "We've destroyed half their infrastructure." An aide swallowed nervously. "They anticipated losses, Marshal. It's built in. Built in," Corrin repeated, disbelief bleeding into anger. "You don't build systems expecting to lose." Humans did. That truth became unavoidable as loyalist fleets found themselves isolated, low on supplies, surrounded not by enemies, but by silence. Worlds they had once controlled refused them landing rights. Repair docks were closed. Even neutral systems denied access, citing network guidelines of non-cooperation with aggressors. For the first time in Concord history, military power meant nothing without consent. Corin watched as one of his escort ships powered down weapons and drifted out of formation. Then another. Then another. "This is mutiny," he hissed. "No," his aide said quietly. "It's choice." The Ascendant will fire it anyway. It died alone. Across the galaxy, similar scenes played out. The civil war the Concord had feared burned hot and fast, then sputtered out, not because one side crushed the other, but because too many people refused to keep fighting. Zaleth stood before the council chamber one final time as the last loyalist stronghold surrendered. The chamber looked different now. Brighter. Open. Representatives from dozens of species stood where only arbiters once had. No dais. No hierarchy. Just a circle. "The Concord is over," Arbiter Vesh said, her voice stripped of its former certainty. "What comes next?" Zaleth did not answer immediately. He looked instead at the empty space where Elias Rourke had knelt. "What comes next," Zaleth said at last, "is responsibility." The transition was not easy. Old systems failed. New ones struggled. Disagreements flared. Some worlds left the network, choosing isolation. Others joined late, cautiously. The galaxy did not become perfect. It became honest. Years passed. Then decades. The story of the last human spread, told and retold, changing slightly each time. Some versions painted Elias as a saint. Others as a revolutionary. A few as a dangerous fool. The network preserved the original record anyway. Humans, after all, believed truth mattered more than comfort. On New Dawn, the memorial grew into a gathering place. Children from different species played beneath the stone inscription. Scholars debated philosophy where soldiers once patrolled. And sometimes, visitors asked the same question. Did the human really mean to save us? The answer was always the same. He meant to give us a choice. Zaleth lived long enough to see the galaxy stabilize into something unrecognizable from the Concord he had ruled. Trade replaced tribute. Councils replaced decrees. Wars still happened, but they ended faster, because no one could pretend they were necessary forever. On the anniversary of Elias Rourke's execution, Zaleth recorded a message for the network. It was short. He had learned that brevity carried weight. "We thought mercy was weakness," he said. "We were wrong. Mercy was the only strength that outlived us." When Zaleth finally died, his passing was marked not by mourning rituals or monuments, but by a simple gesture. Across the galaxy, network nodes dimmed for 1 minute. Ships paused. Conversation stopped. Then life went on. Far from the old centers of power, on a quiet world orbiting a yellow star, a human child listened to the story for the first time. She frowned, trying to understand. "They killed him?" she asked. "Yes," her teacher replied. "And he still won?" The teacher smiled. "He didn't win. He taught." The child considered this, then looked up at the night sky filled with ships from 100 worlds traveling freely, openly. "I think I like humans," she said. "So does the galaxy," the teacher answered. "If you made it this far, here's something to think about. and I want to see your answers below. If humanity vanished tomorrow, what idea do you think we'd leave behind that the universe could never erase?